Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Welcome back to our webcast of our Saturday morning class on Shankaracharya's Atma Bodha. We'll pick up the thread where we left off. Last week we were seeing this verse 10. And in verse 10 we discussed one of the most crucial problems that we address in Advaita Vedanta, and that is the problem that the attributes that belong to your body and mind get attributed to Atma, your true self. Just to get established on the basics, your true self, consciousness, the consciousness by which you know what I'm saying right now, the consciousness by which you know what's happening in your mind right now, that consciousness is your essential nature. And to return to some of our observations at the end of the last class, your consciousness is neither young nor old. Your body is young or old, not consciousness. Your consciousness is neither male nor female. Your body has gender. Consciousness has no gender. And the reason this is so significant is this. The problems that belong to your body get attributed to your true self, consciousness, Atma. We call this superimposition. Superimposition means to attribute the qualities of your body and mind, which belong to your body and mind, we falsely attribute them to Atma, which means the problems that belong to your body get attributed to your true self. The problems that belong to your mind get attributed to your true self. And it is this problem of superimposition that really is it's the cause for suffering. Imagine if you didn't have this superimposition at all, and it was just absolutely clear to you that your true nature is consciousness. Consciousness unaffected by the body, consciousness unaffected by the mind. If that is your understanding, if you're enlightened, then the problems of your body belong to your body, the problems of your mind belong to your mind, and you're okay in spite of the problems of your body and mind. We discussed this in more detail in a prior class, and let me just mention, if you miss a class, it's always better to go back and watch the prior class before you're watching this one. Anyway, let us continue today. To introduce the next verse. Very interesting situation. The problem of suffering doesn't belong to Atma. We said the problems belong to your body, the problems belong to your mind, and as we said right at the beginning of this text, Atma is divine, the inner divinity, which is eternally free, full, complete, limitless. Atma has no problems. Your body and mind have the problems. And for that reason, it's worth our effort to understand the body and mind in some more detail. A little bit like a physician, actually a medical student who has to study anatomy. Now, anatomy is necessary for a medical student because all the problems take place, the problems they treat, the illnesses they treat, take place in the body. Since the locus of illness is the body, the medical doctors have to study and know anatomy very well. Here, since the locus of the problem the problem of suffering, since the locus is the body and mind, we had better understand the body and mind in some more detail. We're going to see a series of 3 verses in today's class. I'm pretty sure we'll get through all 3. In these 3 verses, we're going to break down the body and mind into several components for the sake of understanding. Just like an anatomy book gives you pictures of each and every part of the body, here we want to differentiate certain aspects of our own human existences. In particular, first of all, the word we're going to use for body, the Sanskrit word, is sharira. There are several words we could use. We're going to use the word sharira here. And interesting choice of words. The root meaning of sharira comes from that which is undergoing decay. That which decays is sharira. The other common word for body is deha. And deha comes from another root. They say dahana yogya. That which is fit for being burnt is your body. So this is the view through the lens of language that your body, sharira, is constantly decaying, and it is a deha, it is fit for burning. Not a very optimistic point of view, but certainly true. We understand that. Now, this term sharira, body, is divided in a 3-fold way. Let's go through this. These are the 3 verses we're going to see. This 3-fold division of sharira, body, into stula sharira, physical body, sukshma sharira, subtle body, and karana sharira, causal body. And we're going to see each of these in quite a bit of detail, 1 verse devoted to each of them. Just a quick word on translation. When we say stula, I translate it as physical. In Indian English, it is very common to say gross body. I have to tell you this funny story. When I was a young American student studying this Vedanta for the first time, and reading all these books printed in India, and when I saw printed in the books, gross body, you understand, of course, in American English, gross has a very, very different meaning. So I was wondering, what's gross about the body? Anyway, gross body means physical body, that which is tangible, that which you can see, hear, taste, smell, and touch is your stula sharira, physical body. Sukshma, subtle, specifically means intangible. If your stula sharira is that which is tangible, physical, sukshma sharira is that which is non-physical, intangible, and we'll see that in just a few more minutes. Finally, the karana sharira, causal body, which we'll discuss later. Another problem with these books printed in India, pardon me for making a point here, but I find it very amusing how causal body in so many books, not just 1 or 2, many, is misspelled not as causal body, but casual body. So imagine me as a young student, I'm reading about the gross body, and then I'm reading about the casual body, and I got quite confused, I think. Anyway, just a comment about translation. So we are going to see in these 3 verses, stula sharira, physical body, sukshma sharira, subtle body, and karana sharira, causal body. Let's see the verse 11. Repeat after me. Panchikrita mahabhuta, Panchikrita mahabhuta, sambhavam karma sanchitam, sambhavam karma sanchitam, shariram sukha dukkhanam, shariram sukha dukkhanam, bhogayatanamuchyate, bhogayatanamuchyate. Good. Start in the third line. Shariram here means the stula sharira, the physical body, which is, in the final line, uchyate, it is called the bhoga ayatanam. Ayatanam, locus, location. The locus for bhoga. Now, bhoga can mean enjoyment, but in a broader sense, it means experience, all experience. So your shariram, your physical body, is the bhoga ayatanam. It is the locus of experience. The experience of what? In the third line, sukha dukkhanam. Experience of sukha, happiness, pleasure, dukkha, pain, suffering, and everything else. The locus of experience, and therefore the locus of suffering, which is why we're performing this analysis. So your physical body, shariram, is the bhoga ayatanam, the locus of experience. And going up to the beginning of the verse, it is panchikrita mahabhuta sambhavam. That's one long compound word. Your physical body is sambhavam. It is born of mahabhuta. Some of you know that expression, mahabhuta or mahabhuta, fundamental elements. In ancient times, they had a understanding of the world that the physical world consisted of panchabhuta, 5 elements: space, air, fire, water, and earth. Of course, in modern times, we don't speak of 5 elements. We speak of 104, I think 104 natural elements and a bunch of man-made elements. And so we might, some people have a confusion. How can the ancient rishis be wrong? They said there are only 5 elements. We know better. Further, the ancient rishis said that space, akasha, was an element. We know very well that space is not an element. Although some 150 years ago, for a while, scientists thought that maybe space was an element. They called it ether. And they were trying to explain how radio waves travel through space. And before they understood how radio waves worked, they thought that radio waves required a medium, and they called that medium ether. Later, scientists discovered that radio waves can travel through a vacuum, can travel through nothing. So for a while, they thought there might have been such a thing as ether, space, and then they dismissed it. So space is not one of those 104 elements. Now, how shall we reconcile these two perspectives? The modern perspective of 104 elements and the ancient perspective of 5 elements, including space. The way to reconcile these, in fact, they don't really reconcile. They're 2 entirely different worldviews. In ancient times, the 5 elements was how they saw the world. In modern times, we see the world in a very different way. Now, which is right and which is wrong is clear. There are 105 elements, and space is not an element. Now, if you say, how could the ancient rishis be wrong? Hey, the ancient rishis were not scientists analyzing the world. Whatever the rishis taught about your true nature, Atma, is absolutely correct. Whatever they taught about Brahman, the absolute reality because of which everything exists, is absolutely correct. In the realm of the term used, adhyatma, in the spiritual realm, in a non-physical realm, everything the rishis taught was absolutely true. Outside of that realm, the rishis are not experts. The rishis were not experts on the world. They described the world the best they could, given given the limitations of their understanding. They didn't have all scientific instruments that we have today. So based on what they could understand at the time, they analyzed the world in terms of 5 elements. Instead of saying it's wrong, it would be better to say it is an archaic model. It is a way of describing the world that is helpful. Every model is helpful, but it's not as accurate as our modern understanding. So they envision the world as being made of these 5 elements. The world is made of 5 elements. Your physical body is made of 5 elements. Mahabhuta Sambhavam, born of 5 elements. And one more adjective, Panchikrita, literally means made 5-fold. And this has to do with, we're talking about ancient physics. So in ancient times, they understood the world in terms of 5 elements. In ancient times, they also understood how these 5 physical elements came to be. In modern times, this is just as strange as anything can be. The elements that make up your body, how did they come into existence? The carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen, the elements, fundamental elements that make up your body, do you know where they come from? Scientists have studied this and have shown very clearly that the elements that comprise your body were formed when ancient stars blew up. Stars have a lifetime, a life cycle. And when a star reaches the end of its life cycle, you might remember, I'll bore you with 2 more minutes of science, you might remember stars are made of this hydrogen gas, which gets compressed and compressed. When it gets compressed sufficiently, it starts to form other elements. And when these stars reach the end of their lifetimes, they got compressed so much that they formed all the other elements. If it weren't for these stars, there'd only be hydrogen element in the universe. The stars are like manufacturing plants. They manufacture all the elements from which your body is made. Tell me, 4,000 years ago, what did the ancient rishis know about all of this? Absolutely nothing. So they had to explain how these physical elements came into existence, and they had to explain without the benefit of all of our modern scientific understanding and instruments, so they have another model. We have a model of 5 elements. We have another model called Panchikarana. Panchikarana means making 5-fold. And how they envisioned the creation of these 5 physical elements is they said that there were precursors for the 5 physical elements. The precursors were 5 subtle elements. We have physical elements, space, air, fire, water, and earth. We also have subtle elements. We have stula bhutas, physical elements, and sukshma bhutas, subtle elements, non-physical elements. And in the vision of the ancient rishis, they understood these subtle elements to be the precursors for the physical elements, just as in modern science. The hydrogen element inside those ancient stars, that hydrogen was a precursor for all the other elements that were born when those stars exploded. In a similar way, for the ancient rishis, these 5 subtle elements, also same, space, air, fire, water, and earth, but not as physical elements, as subtle elements, as sukshma bhutas. These were the precursors for the physical elements, and they had a very complicated teaching. We're not going to go through the details of it here. It's not helpful. But they have a teaching that describes how the 5 subtle elements go through a process of recombining with each other. And when these subtle elements recombine with each other in a fivefold way, 5 gross elements, 5 stula bhutas are born. I'll say that one more time. We could spend a whole class going through the complicated way that they described it, but we're not going to discuss it, not necessary. But it's important for us to understand that in the vision of the ancient rishis, in this pre-scientific explanation of the world, the ancient rishis envisioned 5 subtle elements, non-physical elements, recombining with each other in a 5-fold way. They give rise to 5 physical elements, stula bhutas, out of which the entire world is made and out of which our bodies are made. Okay, enough. Panchikrita Mahabhuta Sambhavam. Our bodies are made of these 5 physical elements which were formed through this 5-fold recombination of subtle elements. Further, your body is karma sanchitam. The commentator says karma rachitam. Fashioned due to karma, assembled due to karma, arranged or organized due to karma. Your body exists due to karma, and pardon me for pointing out the obvious, the karma of your parents gave rise to your physical body. It's important to know, though, that karma at both levels, both at a very ordinary level, but karma also at a subtle level, talking about karma from this janma, this creation, is the karma of your parents, but there's also this karma of your past lives that determined that you would be born to your parents. And the point I'm leading up to is that your karma, the karma of your past lives that determined your birth in this cycle, your karma is intimately interrelated to the karma of your parents. You were karmically destined to be born to your parents, and it was your parents' karma then that led your parents' karma in this lifetime that led to your birth, specifically the birth of your physical body. This much is just to describe, just to get the big picture of this physical body. What is it? Where did it come from? Is the purpose of this verse 11. Now, verse 12 moves on to the Sukshma Sharira. Verse 11, Stula Sharira, physical body. Verse 12, Sukshma Sharira, subtle body. Pancha prana mano buddhi, pancha prana mano buddhi, dashendriya samanvitam, dashendriya samanvitam, apanchikrita bhutotam, apanchikrita bhutotam, sukshmangam bhoga sadhanam, sukshmangam bhoga sadhanam. Good. Start with that last line. Sukshma angam. Here anga means body. It can mean limb, but here it means body. Sukshma angam, the subtle body. The subtle body is bhoga sadhanam. Remember in the prior verse we had bhoga ayatanam, ayatanam place or locus. So the physical body is the place or locus of bhoga, experience. Here, the sukshmangam, the subtle body, is the bhoga sadhanam. Sadhanam means. A means to an end is sadhana. Please don't think that sometimes we think sadhana means spiritual practice. One of many meanings for sadhana is spiritual practice. The basic meaning of sadhana is a means to reach an end. So the means to reach the end, if the end is spiritual growth, then the means is spiritual practice. For that reason, we use the word sadhana to refer to spiritual practice. But the root meaning of sadhana is a means to accomplish an end. For example, your car, your automobile, is a sadhana for going to work. So you get the idea. Sadhana is a means to accomplish something. Here, the means for bhoga experience. Subtle body is the means for experience. This is a very, very important teaching. Your physical body, in the absence of a subtle body, is a lump of inert flesh. Right? You know this very well. Just we got flesh and muscle and bone and blood and fat. This is a thing. It's an inert, lifeless thing unless it's invested with a life force, and that life force has everything to do with the subtle body. A nice way of defining subtle body is that which enlivens a physical body is the subtle body. Very nice definition. That which gives life to a physical body, an inert physical body, is the sukshma sharira, subtle body, or a kind of a more grim way of looking at it is the difference between a dead body and a living body is the presence and absence of the sukshma sharira. In a living body, sukshma sharira is present. In a dead body, the sukshma sharira is absent. So a very simple definition. We'll get more details in a moment, but for right now, sukshma sharira is that which enlivens the physical body, that which converts a lump of inert stuff, flesh and bone, into a living being. Sometimes the word sukshma sharira gets translated as soul, and this is a little problematic. I'll just share with you briefly. My guru, Swami Dayananda, Puja Swami Dayananda, was so insistent that we use words very carefully, because if we use words casually, it creates a lot of confusion. And the word soul is one of those words that can create a lot of confusion because soul means different things to different people. In Christianity, they'll have one way of understanding soul. In India, the word soul, in Hindu culture, the word soul will be understood differently. And each individual person can have their own interpretation of the word soul. For this reason, Puja Swami Dayananda insisted that we not use words that lead to confusion. For that reason, we're not going to use the word soul at all. Instead, we're going to use the word sukshma sharira, subtle body. And we'll further say that it is this sukshma sharira, subtle body, that leaves the physical body at the time of death and travels on to another life. The transmigrating entity is the word that philosophers like to use. So we can use the word sukshma sharira, subtle body. We can use the word transmigrating entity, that which travels to another life, but we won't use that other four-letter word, pardon the soul happens to be 4 letters. Okay, sorry about that, a little silly. So that sukshma sharira, subtle body, which is bhoga sadhanam, that which enlivens a physical body, makes it capable of experience, the means for experience. Going up one line, it is apanchikrita bhuta Uttam. I'm breaking all the words apart. Uttam, born of, arising from, bhuta, these 5 elements. But here, instead of saying panchikrita bhuta, it says apanchikrita bhuta. From the prior verse, you remember that panchikrita means having undergone this 5-fold recombination to become physical. But before these physical elements that the world is made of, before they underwent this 5-fold recombination, they existed as subtle elements, sukshma bhutas. So the precursors for the physical elements, sthula bhutas, are the non-physical elements, sukshma bhutas. Physical elements are panchikrita. They became physical through this 5-fold process of recombination. But the precursors, the subtle elements, are apanchikrita. They have not undergone this 5-fold process of recombination. They are subtle, they are non-physical, they are non-tangible. This is a really important point that often gets overlooked. Let me share with you an interesting story. In Europe, I think around 400 or 500 years ago, they wanted to understand what was soul. They used that 4-letter word we're not going to use. So they wanted to study scientifically the soul, and one scientist, I don't remember who it was, he devised an experiment to determine what is the weight of a soul. The weight of interesting. And the way he designed his experiment is he didn't experiment on human beings, thank goodness. He used animals, maybe rats or mice. So what he did is he would take a mouse and weigh the mouse, and then he would kill the mouse, and then he would weigh it again. And if the mouse weighed less after being killed, then that change of weight presumably would be the weight of the soul which left the mouse at the time of death. Maybe they didn't use the word soul because soul is more of a religious term. And in fact, interesting, I just remembered this. Biblical religions hold that only human beings have a soul. I completely forgot about this. In the biblical religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, animals don't have a soul. So this scientist was not a religious person. He defined the soul, I suppose, as life force, and he wanted to find out how much that life force, called it soul, how much it weighed. So he tried this experiment on a large number of mice. He weighed them, he then killed them, and then he weighed them again. And surprisingly, he found that on the average, the dead mice weighed a little bit less than the live mice. In fact, he averaged it out to 2 grams. So the scientist determined that the weight of a mouse's soul or life force was 2 grams. And this passed as science 400 years ago, shows how far we've come. Of course, what later scientists figured out, there was a problem in the methodology. And in the methodology, there was apparently some time elapsed between killing the mice and weighing them again. And in that lapse of time, the mice were subject to what scientists would call desiccation. Desiccation means water, they were drying out. Water was evaporating from the bodies of the mice. So it turned out that scientist actually didn't measure the weight of the soul of a mouse. What the scientist measured was how much water was evaporating from the mice. The reason for this story, a little bizarre, The reason for this story is to show the confusion that takes place if we ignore the fact that our definition of Sukshma Sharira is non-physical. No weight. Only physical things, sthula things, have weight. That which is Sukshma is non-physical. It has no weight. So, Apanchikrita bhuta uttam, the subtle body that enlivens your physical body, the subtle body that makes you capable of experience, is made of subtle elements. It is non-physical. And now we get more details, starting at the beginning of the verse. That subtle body has certain aspects, certain elements. And he enumerates these aspects, parts. The subtle body is composed of several parts. In fact, 17 parts. 17 parts are actually enumerated. What are those 17 parts? Pancha prana. 5 kinds of prana, life force. There's an inhalation, an exhalation, circulation of your blood, digestion of food, and the reverse when you throw up. Regurgitation is called one of the 5 pranas. Details are unimportant, but the life force that makes your body function is 5-fold. Prana, by the way, prana in a most general sense means life force. Yes, it can mean breath, but in a more general sense, life force. And that life force is pancha, 5-fold. So there is a 5-fold prana, life force, enlivening your body. Also, next line down, dasha indriya samvitam. It is accompanied by dasha indriya. Dasha, 10, indriya, senses or organs. And those 10 faculties, the translation here. These 10 faculties are in 2 groups of 5. 5 sense faculties and 5 faculties of motion. 5 sense faculties, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and 5 faculties of motion, faculty of grasping, of walking, of talking, of excretion, and of sexual function. The details are unimportant, and even the division is completely arbitrary. A little bit like, an anatomy book is going to divide things down in the way that they've been dividing things down for years. But it's a little bit arbitrary how you divide things up in an anatomy book. And similarly here, when we divide up these 5 senses, by the way, there are more than 5 senses anyway. Everyone talks, we have 5 senses. We got more than that. There are 2 more senses that are really obvious. One is your sense of balance, right? Is that one of the 5? Sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch? No, you have a sense of balance. You also, with your eyes closed, you know the position of your limbs. That's another sense. So even when we say 5 senses, it's little arbitrary. We have more than 5 senses, but our common convention is we refer to 5 senses as they did in ancient India. Similarly, 5 faculties of movement. I think I forgot speech. Speech is one of the 5. So grasping, walking, talking, excretion, and the sexual function are the 5. Completely arbitrary, just to identify that the subtle body is responsible for sensation, sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, and the sense of balance, and the sense of knowing where your limbs are. And your subtle body is responsible also for being able to move. Please just to get a firmer understanding of this, notice you have a physical hand, but the power of grasping is quite different. The physical hand belongs to the stula sharira, physical body, but the power of grasping is quite different. You can have, if you're paralyzed, you have a hand, but you don't have that power of grasping. So this is to differentiate. The hand belongs to your stula sharira, physical body. Power of grasping belongs to the sukshma sharira. Similarly, prana, you have lungs. Lungs belong to your stula sharira, but the life force that allows you to breathe, the capacity for breathing, belongs to the sukshma sharira. Or better example, heart. In your body is this organ, heart, goes on beating. Heart belongs to the stula sharira, but the power of circulation. If the heart is stopped, blood doesn't circulate. Heart exists, but the power of circulation doesn't, because the power of circulation is different than the heart. So therefore, heart belongs to stula sharira, and power of circulation belongs to sukshma sharira. And we see this also, we have two more. So we have five life force, 5 aspects of life force, prana. We have 5 sense organs. The technical term is jnanendriya. Jnana, indriya, sense organs, organ of knowledge. And 5 karma indriya, 5 karmendriyas. If you're not familiar with the Sanskrit, just ignore what I'm saying. Some of you have some Sanskrit background. For your sakes, I'm giving you the technical terms. There are 5 jnanendriyas, sense organs. There are 5 karmendriyas, organs of action. There are 5 kinds of prana. That's 15. I said there were 17 enumerated here. The last 2 are manas and buddhi. Manas becomes mano due to some grammar rules. Manas, mind. Buddhi, intellect. Again, it's an arbitrary way of dividing up mental faculties. There's also a 4-fold way of dividing up mental faculties that's not used here, so we'll set it apart. This 2-fold way of dividing up mental faculties, here's a helpful way. Buddhi is intentional mental activities. When you choose, when you make a decision, when you deliberately think about something, that is buddhi. Manas would be unintentional mental activities. An example of an unintentional mental activity is emotions. You don't choose to feel happy or sad. So emotions belong to manas. Any unintentional, unchosen, uncontrolled mental activity, those belong to manas. Mental activities that are controlled by you or chosen by you belong to buddhi. So this gives us these 17 factors. By the way, this is another good example. Your brain weighs about 2.5 pounds. How much do your thoughts weigh? This is a division between stula, physical, and sukshma, non-physical. Your brain is physical. Your brain has weight. Your thoughts are non-physical. Your thoughts have no weight. They're non-physical. This leads to just a favorite modern example to show the relationship between the body, between the stula sharira and the sukshma sharira and Atma. A few minutes ago I said that the subtle body, the sukshma sharira, is the transmigrating entity. Notice I didn't say Atma travels. And here's another problem with language. Actually a problem with language in India, because Hindi mein Atma and Sukshma Sharira get confused. And in in Hindi, it's very common to talk about Atma traveling to take another life. Well, that's a Hindi meaning of Atma. In Sanskrit, we've defined Atma as the consciousness which reveals what's happening in your mind. And in a prior class, in fact, in 2 prior classes, we discussed how Atma has no size or shape. Remember, non-physical. Atma has no size, shape, no boundary. We went through this even in the last class, if I remember right. Atma has no edge or boundary. Atma has no limit. Therefore, Atma is limitless. We went through this in a prior class. And if Atma is limitless, how do we distinguish your Atma from my Atma? We can't. There is only one Atma, the same all-pervasive Atma that's present, illumining your thoughts and illumining my thoughts. We went through that in a prior class. How can that Atma travel? Obviously, that Atma doesn't travel. What travels is Sukshma Sharira, subtle body. Now, this is a modern metaphor I find so helpful to understand the relationship between Sthula Sharira, physical body, Sukshma Sharira, subtle body, non-physical body, and Atma, consciousness. The modern metaphor, I'm quite sure the ancient rishis would have used this metaphor if computers existed in ancient times. Obviously, there were no computers in the age of the rishis, but nowadays, everyone uses computers, so you're all familiar with the terms hardware and software. You know these terms. Hardware is your physical computer. There is a box. If you have a desktop computer, there's a box. Inside that box are various components. One component is called a power supply, which I suppose is like your physical heart. The metaphor here is comparing the hardware of your computer is like your sthula sharira, physical body, and the software in your computer is compared to the sukshma sharira, subtle body. Allow me to develop this metaphor. Very, very helpful. Your computer has hardware. There's a box equivalent to your body. Inside the computer box is a power supply representing your heart. Inside your computer box is a big chip with hundreds of little wires coming out of it called CPU, Central Processing Unit. That CPU inside, by the way, if you look inside your box, you don't even see it. All you see are the cooling fins attached. So if you look inside your computer box and you see something with a bunch of cooling fins, that device is the CPU chip, the Central Processing Unit. Obviously, that represents your brain, physical brain. Also, inside that box is, mostly we call it hard disk. It's a rectangular unit. Inside this rectangular unit called hard disk are several really thin platters that are spinning. They're called disks. So there are a bunch of they're like a sandwich of these platters, and they're spinning, and it's on those spinning platters that all the data gets stored. Memory. There are also memory chips inside the computer. So there are memory chips inside the computer, short-term memory, and there are these spinning platters, a hard disk, long-term memory. Just as our brains have short-term memory and long-term memory. By the way, neuroscientists have determined that short-term memory and long-term memory are physically in different parts of our brain. Similarly, inside your computer, short-term memory is in one location, chips. Long-term memory is in another location on these platters. Now here's an interesting observation. The hard disk in your computer contains many gigabytes of data, billions and billions of bits of data. Your hard disk inside the computer weighs less than a pound, quite small. Tell me, when you load all of this hundreds of gigabytes of data onto that hard disk, does it become heavier? So you get your computer without any software installed, then you install all the software onto that hard disk. When you install all the software, does that hard disk become heavier? Isn't that interesting? We're making a distinction between that which is physical, sthula, the hard disk, and that which is non-physical, the data, which is sukshma. Notice, no one would say that data and programs don't exist. They do exist on your computer's hard disk, but they exist as non-physical entities. This is sukshma sharira for the physical body. Just as the software and data exist in your computer as non-physical entities, in the same way, this sukshma sharira, composed of these 17 parts, the 5 kinds of prana, the 5 sense organs, the 5 organs of action, your mind and your intellect, all of these exist within your physical body as non-physical realities. They have no weight, they have no dimension, they absolutely exist, but they exist as non-physical entities. Now, this metaphor has more applications. Have you ever purchased a new computer? When you got the new computer, you had a lot of documents on documents and software on your old computer, and you wanted to transfer the documents and software from your old computer to your new computer. How did you do that? What you did not do is you didn't physically take the memory chips and hard disk out of the old computer and install them in a new computer. By the way, that would be the equivalent of transplanting someone's brain from one body into another body. That's not done. It's not necessary to do that with your computer. You didn't transfer the hardware, you transferred the software. The programs and data that were on your old computer were transferred into your new computer. Can you see where this is going? We're talking about reincarnation. What happens in reincarnation is that the sukshma sharira that contains the equivalent of the programs and documents gets detached from the prior physical body when that physical body dies. And according to the laws of karma, that sukshma sharira is driven by the force of karma to acquire another physical body. And just like the term they use is you load software and documents into a computer, in the same way, your sukshma sharira got loaded into your physical body at the time of your conception. So at the time of conception, your body began to take form, and that physical body taking form in your mother's womb was invested with your sukshma sharira, or to use the computer terminology, the embryo or fetus was loaded with the sukshma sharira, the subtle body that had left the prior dead body and had traveled and became associated with the new physical body. This describes transmigration. This describes reincarnation. So notice, an old computer gets thrown away, the software and documents get transferred into the new computer. It's quite a nice metaphor for reincarnation. Now we'll finish this metaphor. By the way, we're not going to make it to the third verse. We'll see that in our next class. But this metaphor is so nice, it's worth spending this time on. Where the metaphor concludes is to describe the relationship of Atma. So we're talking about Sthula Sharira, your physical body, Sukshma Sharira, that which enlivens your physical body, and then Atma, the consciousness which pervades your physical body, the consciousness which makes your mind and thoughts and emotions known to you. The metaphor very nicely covers this final feature, Atma. And that is, suppose you have a brand new computer and all the software and programs and data and documents have been loaded into the computer and it doesn't work. Nothing happens. You turn it on and off, nothing happens. You hit Control-Alt-Delete, nothing happens. The computer is dead. What is the problem with the computer? You neglected to plug it in. Computers require electricity to run. This is a third factor. There is physical, there is the hardware, there is software, and there is also electricity required to make that computer function. In the same way here, we have a Sthula Sharira, physical body, Sukshma Sharira, subtle body that enlivens the body. There has to be a third factor. That third factor, by the way, don't confuse it with Karana Sharira, which we'll talk about in our next class. We're not talking about that. The third factor we're talking about now is Atma, consciousness. Without consciousness, this would be a thing waiting to be illumined by the light of consciousness. That goes back to our prior classes. I don't want to. It also doesn't work with our metaphor. So let's stay with the metaphor. The hardware and software will only function in the presence of electricity running through that computer. In the same way, this Sthula Sharira and Sukshma Sharira will only function in the presence of consciousness, Atma. One last part of the metaphor. This is amazing. Some of you may know that have you ever been into a computer lab where there are many computers in a row? All the computers are plugged into the power. Some of you may know something about electricity, and that is, electricity flows through wires, and it's actually the same electricity that flows into one computer and out of that computer into the next computer, into the next computer, into the next computer. If several computers are all plugged in, they're in a row, they're all plugged into the same source of electrical power, it's actually the same electricity making all of those computers function. What a delightful metaphor, because it shows how it is the same consciousness that is present in this body-mind complex. It is the same consciousness that's present in your body and mind, just as it's the same electricity that flows through every computer, hardware and software. In the same way, it is the same consciousness, it is the same Atma, present Wherever there is a sthula and sukshma sharira, physical and subtle body, consciousness is present, creating a living, conscious being. Many computer hardwares, many computer softwares, one electricity. Many physical bodies, sthula sharira, many subtle bodies, sukshma sharira, one consciousness, one Atma, present, manifest in each and every one. Very nice metaphor. We'll see the third body, Karana Sharira, in our next class. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.